Hello everyone, welcome to the Lang Focus channel and my name is Paul. Today's topic is the Irish language, or
Gaeilge,
as it's called in Irish. In English we have the word Gaelic, which may refer to Irish, but Irish people generally don't call it Gaelic in English. And they don't call it Irish Gaelic. Many people will insist it's Irish, just Irish. Irish is a member of the Gaelic or Gaeilge language group, one of the two groups of insular Celtic languages, the Celtic languages that developed in Ireland and Britain and are still in existence today. For more background information on the Celtic languages in general, check out my video on that topic right here. Irish is spoken in, you guessed it, Ireland. That includes both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. There are three main dialects of Irish: Munster, Connacht, and Ulster. It's difficult to get statistics about the number of native speakers of Irish, but according to the Republic of Ireland's census of 2016, there are around 74,000 daily speakers of Irish outside of the education system, which is less than 2% of the population. And there are a little over 4,000 native speakers in Northern Ireland. But there are close to 2 million second language speakers with at least some knowledge of Irish, and it's a required subject in schools in the Republic of Ireland. Which many students love to complain about: history. It's not certain exactly when Celtic language speakers came to Ireland, but it was probably more than 2,500 years ago. There are no records of the language from that time period. The oldest form of Gaeilge that we know was Archaic Irish, or Primitive Irish. We have samples from the Ogham inscriptions dating to the early 4th century CE. They are inscribed in stone in the Ogham alphabet, and mainly consist of fragments containing personal names. During this period of the Ogham inscriptions, in other words the Primitive Irish period, Irish speakers migrated from Ireland to Scotland and to the Isle of Man, where the Irish language would eventually evolve into two different languages, Scottish Gaelic, or Gaelic as they call it, and Manx. By the 7th century, Archaic Irish had evolved into Old Irish, of which there are longer written texts in existence. Old Irish was written until the 10th century, by which time it had already developed into an early stage of Middle Irish. Writings during the Middle Irish period show emerging dialectal variation in the different areas where it was spoken. The late Old Irish period and the early Middle Irish period were characterized by Viking raids and Norse settlement in Ireland, which had some impact on the vocabulary of Irish, but the grammar wasn't really affected. Some of the Norse loanwords that entered Irish are
Pin,
meaning penny, and
Margu,
meaning market, and some vocabulary relating to ships and navigation. In the late 12th century, the Norman invasion of Ireland took place, when Anglo-Normans conquered and settled the land. The language of the new ruling class was Norman French, which was used alongside Irish and English, the language of many of the commoners who moved from England to Ireland during that time. In large part, they were eventually assimilated and became more Irish than the Irish themselves, and Irish became the most widely spoken language again. But Norman French left its mark on Irish, in some dialects more than others. Loanwords from Norman French include
Garsoon,
meaning boy,
Giustish,
meaning justice,
Shomara,
meaning room,
Aglish,
meaning church, and many more. That was all happening during the period of Classical Irish,
Gaeilge Classicach,
from the 13th to 18th centuries. Classical Irish was a literary language learned by poets and scholars, and it remained relatively unchanged during this time period. But the spoken language, known as Early Modern Irish, kept gradually evolving towards Modern Irish. Irish remained the most widely spoken language until around the year 1800, but English control meant that the English language was the prestige language, and the more prosperous Irish began adopting the English language in greater numbers. Then, the Great Famine of 1846 to 1848 disproportionately impacted the poor, who were mainly Irish speakers. Around 1 million people died, and around 1 million emigrated during the famine. The Irish language became seriously endangered and limited to certain areas, most of them isolated rural areas. Another factor in the decline of Irish was the introduction of national schools, state-funded primary schools which prohibited the use of Irish and enforced an English-only policy until 1871. In the late 19th century, a revival was underway, with an Irish-language newspaper, literature, and successful efforts to make the Irish language part of the school curriculum. Part of this process was the development of a standard language to unite the various dialects, which was completed in 1958. Now, Irish is a living language with an existing community of native speakers. It's the first official language of the Republic of Ireland, and it's widely studied as a heritage language in schools. But it's still considered endangered as a spoken native language, something that many Irish people hope to change. So, what is Irish like? Phonology. Broad and slender consonants. One important feature of Irish is that most written consonants have two different pronunciations, broad and slender. Broad consonants have a velarized pronunciation, meaning that the back of your tongue raises towards the soft palate, or velum, when you produce the consonant sound. Slender consonants have a palatalized pronunciation, meaning that the middle of the tongue is raised towards the hard palate. In modern Irish orthography, the adjacent vowels indicate whether the consonant is broad or slender. The broad vowels are A, O, and U, and the narrow vowels are I and E. For example,
Cad.
meaning what, and
Cab.
meaning permission.
Cad. Cab.
In the first word, this A is a broad vowel, so the C is pronounced as a broad consonant, the hard K sound, a voiceless velar stop. The D is also broad. This symbol here indicates velarization. The K here doesn't need that symbol because it already represents a velar consonant. In the second word, this slender E vowel is added to indicate that the C is pronounced as a slender consonant. In other words, it's palatalized. Another example,
Paka.
meaning pack, and
Paka.
meaning sin. In the first word, we see the broad vowel A twice, so the P and the C both represent broad consonants. In the second word, again, the E is a slender vowel, so the P is palatalized. In other words, slender. Note that when you see a slender and broad consonant side by side like this, the one closest to the consonant indicates slenderness or broadness, but often isn't pronounced as a vowel itself. Another example,
Boy.
meaning yellow, and
B.
meaning bee. This vowel and consonant are broad, and this vowel and consonant are slender. Again, this U is not pronounced as a vowel, but just indicates that the preceding consonant is broad. The basic rule is
Queel a queel. Yahm na laham.
which means slender with slender, broad with broad. This means that in the middle of a word, slender vowels must appear on both sides of a slender consonant, and broad vowels must appear on both sides of a broad consonant. For example,
Farige.
here the R, or double R, must have a broad vowel both before and after, even though the one after it is not pronounced as a vowel itself. Also, when consonants appear together in a cluster, they must all share the same broad or slender quality. For example,
Kesh.
meaning question. Both the S and T are slender due to the preceding I vowel. Initial consonant mutations. Another feature of Irish phonology is initial consonant mutations, a change in a consonant at the beginning of a word in certain grammatical contexts. There are two types of initial consonant mutation, lenition, or
Shevu.
and eclipsis, or
Uru.
first, lenition. In most cases, but not all, this type of mutation causes a stop to become a fricative. For example,
Bam.
meaning woman becomes
Vam.
after the definite article in the accusative case.
Vam.
Lenition is shown in writing by placing the letter H after the original consonant. Another example is after singular possessive adjectives. Take this word,
Wahish.
meaning mother. My mother would be.
Mawahish.
Notice that the initial consonant is pronounced more like W or V, rather than a bilabial nasal M sound. This type of mutation also occurs after certain prepositions and in other contexts. Next, eclipsis. This type of mutation usually involves a voiceless stop becoming voiced, or a voiced stop becoming a nasal. Like lenition, eclipsis happens in certain grammatical environments, such as after plural possessive adjectives. So the word for children is
Posti.
but to say our children, it's.
Arbosti.
This is shown in writing by adding the letter representing the new sound in front of the original one. And it's used after some combinations of dative prepositions plus the singular definite article. For example,
Bird.
meaning table, but on the table is,
Ejamord.
and also after the preposition e without the definite article. For example,
Tach.
meaning house, but in a house is.
Edach.
It's also used with certain numbers,
Bod.
boat,
Shacht mod.
7 boats. By the way, it's worth noting here that in Standard Irish, for non-human nouns, the singular form is used when counting, though in dialects, the plural forms are used as well. So why do these mutations appear in these different environments that seem to have little to do with each other? Well, it's because in an earlier stage of Irish, they appeared in clear phonetic environments. Lenition occurred between vowels, both within words and across word boundaries, and eclipsis took place after a nasal sound. Their purpose was to allow speech to flow without pauses. Some of these vowel sounds and nasal sounds were part of grammatical endings that have since disappeared. So now, the mutations themselves indicate or give hints about that grammatical information. Prepositions. Another interesting element of Irish is its use of prepositions like
Egg, eis, as, do.
They can be used on their own with definite articles or with personal pronominal endings. When used alone or with a definite article, they work much the same way as they do in English. But you might recall that in the previous section on initial consonant mutation, we saw that many prepositions, when used with the singular definite article, cause eclipsis, like in the phrase
Is a mord,
meaning on the table, or
is a mod.
meaning on the boat. The most interesting part is that you can add a suffix to the preposition, which acts like a personal pronoun. So in the sentence,
Hug sé targadum,
meaning he gave the money to me,
dum,
means to me,
do,
means to, and the nasal means me. To us would be,
dún.
and so on. Along with the suffix which is added, the preposition itself also changes a little in many cases, as you can see in the parts that are highlighted in blue. These are the inflected forms of the prepositions. This preposition, egg, meaning at, can be used to show possession, since there's no separate word meaning to have in Irish. For example, this sentence means I have a brother.
Tá drethagam.
Word for word it's, is brother at me. Numbers. The number system in Irish is fairly complex. First of all, there are 3 types of cardinal numbers, numbers used to count. Disjunctive numbers. These are numbers that are used in calculations, phone numbers, telling the time, and other contexts when they're not counting a noun that follows. A particle, a, normally comes before them, with an h prefix before initial vowels. Non-human conjunctive numbers. These are numbers used to count non-human nouns. Most of these are the same as the disjunctive numbers without the preceding a or ah. But note that the numbers 1, 2, and 4 are different. Note that numbers 2 to 6 cause the noun to undergo lenition in the initial consonant. And for the number 1, it's optional if this word, ein, is also here. And numbers 7 to 10 cause the noun to undergo eclipsis. Human conjunctive numbers. As you can probably guess, these are numbers used to count human nouns. These ones are significantly different in form from the others, notably in these suffixes on many of the numbers. Let's take the number 8 as an example. If you're simply counting on your fingers, it's
A hocht,
if you're counting horses, it's
Acht gapel.
if you're counting children, it's
Achter posti.
if you're counting books, it's
acht ljouwer,
if you are counting sisters, it's
achter jezevoer. Tá achter jezevoer agam.
that sentence means I have 8 sisters. Counting to 2,
A do,
2 dogs,
Gá wadra,
2 children.
bert fasti.
And there are also ordinal numbers, numbers we use to indicate order, like first, second, etc. Most of these are related to the cardinal numbers, but have different suffixes or other differences in form. But this one is completely different. Verbs. There are 2 categories of regular verbs in Irish, first conjugation and second conjugation, as well as irregular verbs. Irish conjugations involve a combination of suffixes and personal pronouns. In the present tense conjugations we see here, the first person singular and first person plural have synthetic endings, endings that tell us person and number, so a subject pronoun isn't necessary. The other forms have an analytic ending, one that tells us nothing about person and number, so the verb needs to be followed by a pronoun. First conjugation verbs and second conjugation verbs simply take somewhat different endings. In the first conjugation, the endings are for the first person singular,
Imid,
for the first person plural, and for the others. That's when the verb base contains a broad vowel before the final consonant. If a slender vowel appears there, then the endings are
imid,
In the second conjugation, the endings are
Imid.
with a broad stem and
Imid.
with a slender stem. That's just in the present tense. There are a variety of different tenses, including the imperfect, in other words, the habitual past, the preterite, in other words, the simple past, the future, and the conditional, which all use a combination of synthetic endings and analytic endings with pronouns. Some sentences. Now that we've examined a few key features of Irish, let's look at a few sentences and see what we find. Before, we briefly saw this sentence meaning, he gave me the money.
Thug sé táirgad dom.
Let's take a closer look. Word for word it's, gave he, the, T prefix, money to me. First off, we can see that the most basic word order of Irish is VSO, verb subject object. This word
Thug.
is the past indicative analytic form of the verb.
Táis.
Like we saw with the present tense verb forms before, analytic means that this verb form doesn't tell us anything about person or number, so a pronoun is needed. And this is the pronoun right here.
Sé.
Means he. Next is the singular definite article. This word
Airgad.
is the word for money. And like we saw before, this word
Dom.
is an inflected preposition, a combination of
Da.
meaning to and the prefix meaning me. Now what's this T doing here? This is similar to the initial consonant mutations that we saw before. It's inserted between the article and nouns beginning with a vowel. It's also inserted before nouns beginning in S in some contexts. For example,
Sráds.
meaning street, and
A tráds.
meaning the street. The specifics of when this happens are somewhat complicated, as they are with the mutations that we saw before. Another sentence. This one means, I have to get up early.
Bí an orm éirí go lua.
Word for word it's, is, on me, rise, adverb particle, early. The first word
Bí an.
is the present indicative analytic habitual form of the verb be. This present tense form applies to general actions and states that are habitual, not to those that are only true for the current moment. So this sentence means I have to get up early on a regular basis, not just once. To say I have to get up early, as in only tomorrow, it would be
Tá orm éirí go lua.
This is also a present tense form of the verb be, but is not habitual. Next, we see another inflected preposition,
Orm.
which means on me. So saying it is on me expresses obligation in Irish. Next, we have a verb meaning to rise. This form is a verbal noun, which is often used where we would use the to infinitive in English, and where the present participle, the ing form, is used in English. Next, we see the word
Go.
which has a number of different usages, but in this case it functions to turn the next word into an adverb.
Lua.
Is an adjective meaning fast or early, but together with
Go.
it functions as an adverb. Let's go back to the first word for a minute.
Bí an.
Like I said before, this is a form of the verb be, which means to be. This is a special verb with many different forms that other verbs don't have, including the present habitual that we saw before, and a special negative form that negates the regular present tense. So we have
Tá orm éirí go lua.
meaning I need to wake up early, and that becomes
Níl orm éirí go lua.
meaning I don't have to wake up early. The highlighted words are all forms of the verb be, but this is not the only verb meaning to be in Irish. There's another verb, is. Is used when you want to say what someone or something is. One noun or pronoun is equivalent to another noun or pronoun. The verb be is used when you want to describe someone or something. So there's often a noun or a pronoun with an adjective to describe it. So we have
Is múntóidí.
meaning she's a teacher, and
Tá sé lách.
meaning she is kind, but
Is duine láchaí.
means she's a kind person. Here, kind person is a noun phrase, so we use is. Also, note the difference in the personal pronouns. E is a form of the personal pronoun that is used specifically with is. She is the regular subject form. Wow, there's a lot to take in when dealing with the Irish language. It sure is interesting, but it's also a little overwhelming and intimidating. Every aspect of the language seems to be filled with details and rules that need to be learned and practiced. But in spite of that, or maybe because of that, a lot of people who choose to study Irish for their own reasons really go deep down the rabbit hole and get into it and study it passionately. In this video, we can only barely scratch the surface, but if you decide to study the Irish language, a fascinating journey awaits you. The question of the day, for learners of Irish, what's been your experience in learning the language? What have you found challenging? What have you found interesting? And for native speakers of Irish, what elements of the language do you think that learners need to focus on the most? A number of native speakers have told me how disturbed they are by the lack of authentic pronunciation among learners of Irish. They were referring specifically to people who learn Irish at school. They told me that most teachers of Irish don't know authentic Irish phonology, so they teach Irish with English phonemes, missing the distinction between broad and slender consonants, for example. Do you agree with that assessment? Be sure to follow Lang Focus on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And as always, many thanks to my Patreon supporters, especially my top-tier Patreon supporters, these lovely people right here on the screen. Many thanks to them. And to everyone, thank you for watching and have a nice day.